So usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, right?
Yep.
Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged little white line, and the doctor just points to the screen.
Right, yeah, you literally see the fracture.
Exactly. It's a binary reality. You're either broken or you're not broken.
And that gives people a lot of certainty. I mean, human beings naturally gravitate toward things that are, visible, things that are easily categorized by a clear cause and effect.
Yeah, but the second you step into the world of neurodevelopment, and specifically into the world of autistic services, that x-ray machine is just totally useless.
Oh, how completely useless.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just incredibly murky because we're dealing with human behavior and neurology and, honestly, society's deeply ingrained expectations of what even makes a quote-unquote normal person.
Right, and defining normal is exactly where the water gets incredibly muddy.
So today, for you listening, we're taking a really close look at those muddy waters. We're doing a deep dive into a single, just extremely dense piece of writing. It's an excerpt from a Substack post by Jaime Hoerricks, PhD.
Yeah, and the title alone really sets the stage.
It does. It's called Priced Out of Personhood, the Industry of Repair. And, well, our mission today is to critically examine the actual language of support and care within autistic services.
Because Hoerricks makes this argument that well-intentioned systems might actually just be masking control, right? Like masking norm enforcement.
Exactly. And the source text we're pulling from today is brief. It's literally just a few paragraphs, but Hoerricks is offering a profound philosophical critique here.
Yeah, we really need to treat it almost like a rich historical document because every single word Hoerricks uses is deliberate.
Right.
So we're going to have to just sit with this text, slow down and really look at the underlying mechanisms of the language itself.
I think we should start right at the subtitle of the piece because it establishes the core thesis so perfectly. The subtitle reads, "When care is designed to widen tolerance, not widen the room."
That phrase is just, yeah.
I want to pause on that first part, widen tolerance. Because when I read that, I started thinking about the actual, physical sensory experience of being tolerated.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, picture this. You're hosting a dinner party, right? And you have this beautiful table. It's set perfectly for 8 people. It's a bit crowded, but it works.
Okay, I'm with you.
Then a 9th person arrives unexpectedly. Widening tolerance in this scenario is reluctantly dragging this rigid, incredibly uncomfortable folding chair out of the garage and just squeezing it into the corner of the table.
Right, right.
You are technically allowing that person into the room, but they're totally wedged in. They can't reach the food. Everyone is bumping elbows with them. The whole environment is actively hostile to their comfort, even though, sure, they're technically allowed to be in the space.
That's such a good analogy. And to take that dinner party scenario just a step further, think about what's actually being demanded of that 9th guest.
Right. What are they supposed to do?
When you merely widen tolerance, you are placing the entire burden of adaptation directly onto the individual. You're expecting that guest to just fold themselves up, keep their elbows tucked in, and, definitely not complain about the uncomfortable chair.
Because they don't want to disrupt the flow of the other 8 people.
Exactly. The system, which in this case is the dinner table, remains completely unchanged. It just grits its teeth and endures the disruption of this extra person.
Wow.
Yeah.
But then the second half of Hoerricks' subtitle is about widening the room. And that requires a totally different, an architectural mindset.
It's a fundamental shift.
Because widening the room means looking at the space and deciding, well, the table itself is the problem. You bring in a larger table or you physically knock down a wall so that everyone present can actually participate without having to shrink themselves down.
And that maps so perfectly onto how institutions manage neurodivergent individuals. Let's look at the norm that these institutions enforce every day. In a typical classroom or workplace, the enforced norm is this very, very narrow band of acceptable behavior. It means sitting perfectly still, maintaining constant eye contact, suppressing any physical signs of distress.
Speaking in a highly modulated cadence.
Yeah, right. And if an autistic individual struggles with those specific parameters, a system focused on tolerance might say, allow them to take a 5-minute break in the hallway when they get overwhelmed.
They still have to come back.
Exactly. It still expects them to return to the desk and just mimic that narrow band of normal behavior for the rest of the day.
So connecting this to something you listening might experience in your own life, think about a modern, open-plan corporate office.
Oh, a nightmare for sensory processing.
It's a total nightmare. If someone has sensory processing differences and the noise is overwhelming, widening tolerance Is the HR department giving them a pair of cheap noise-canceling headphones, but insisting they stay at their desk in the middle of the bullpen because, well, that's company policy?
Right. They're tolerating the difference.
Yes. Widening the room would be creating dedicated, quiet workspaces that actually fundamentally change the architecture of how the company operates.
And that distinction right there highlights the core tension in Hoerricks' piece. If an institution is only building tolerance, if they're just handing out headphones or pulling up folding chairs, they are fundamentally prioritizing their own operational flow over the flourishing of the individual.
That's a huge distinction.
True care is rooted in asking what a person needs to thrive. Tolerance asks what a person needs to do so the institution can just keep operating without being inconvenienced.
Okay, but this brings up a massive logical gap for me.
Yeah.
If a system's true goal is just institutional management, and if it's only offering that uncomfortable folding chair, how does it get away with it without massive public backlash? Like, if a school or a clinic is actively prioritizing its own convenience over a child's flourishing, you'd expect parents and advocates to just be constantly up in arms.
Oh, there would be. Absolutely. If the system presented itself honestly.
Right.
But institutions don't announce that their goal is management. They use linguistic camouflage. Hoerricks captures this dynamic perfectly with this line. They called it support. That is what made it harder to see.
Yeah, Hoerricks provides this whole list of soft words deployed by what the text calls the industry of repair. The author states that control arrives wrapped in words like care, services, goals, readiness, coaching, and skills.
Let's really analyze the mechanism of how those specific words shield a system from critique, because language dictates power dynamics, right? If an industry used harsh, descriptive language like, if an educational program explicitly called its methods behavioral correction or norm enforcement, the public would recoil immediately.
Yeah, no parent is going to sign a permission slip that says, we will now subject your child to institutional norm enforcement so they are less annoying in the cafeteria.
Exactly. The shape of the thing would be obvious, and it would give individuals a clearly defined target to push back against. But if that exact same program is presented in a glossy brochure under the banner of readiness coaching or support services, the underlying demand is totally hidden.
It becomes practically bulletproof.
It is very difficult to legally or culturally protest against a service.
Wait, I'm getting stuck on the word readiness here. Because, devil's advocate, aren't we always getting ready for things in life? Like, we prepare kids to be ready for kindergarten. We train employees to be ready for management. Why is readiness considered a mechanism of control in this context?
You have to look at the unstated second half of that sentence. Ready for what? Right. In the context of the industry of repair, readiness rarely means equipping the individual with the tools they need to navigate the world safely. It usually means molding the individual until they are ready to enter a neurotypical environment without disrupting it.
I see.
It's essentially a metric of how well they can mimic the enforced norm.
So readiness is just a measure of how successfully they've been sanded down to fit the institution's preferred shape.
That's a great way to put it, and that leads directly to the concept of goals and skills, which Hoerricks also flags as this dangerous soft language.
I really want to look closely at skills, because this is where the water seems just incredibly muddy for anyone trying to navigate these systems. Teaching a child how to safely cross a busy street is a skill. Teaching an adult how to budget their groceries is a skill.
Absolutely.
How does a family member, or how do you, listening to this right now, separate a genuine life-enhancing skill from something Hoerricks defines as norm enforcement?
The framework for separating the two requires looking ruthlessly at the end beneficiary. Who does the skill actually serve?
Okay, give me an example.
Consider the natural, self-soothing behaviors that are common in autistic individuals, often referred to as stimming. This might look like flapping hands when excited or rocking back and forth when anxious. These are very powerful internal regulatory mechanisms.
A way to manage an overwhelming sensory environment.
Right. Now, an institutional program might assign a goal of suppressing that hand flapping. They will document it, track it, and call the suppression of that movement a quote-unquote social skill. They'll provide coaching to help the individual keep their hands quietly in their lap.
Wow.
We have to ask, does taking away that regulatory behavior lead to the individual's internal flourishing? Does it make their life calmer or more joyful?
Usually it's the exact opposite. It forces them to swallow their discomfort and mask their anxiety, which has to be just exhausting.
Exactly. So the skill doesn't serve the individual at all. It serves the people observing the individual. It makes the autistic person look more neurotypical, which makes them less noticeable in a grocery store and quieter in a classroom.
And that is pure norm enforcement, dressed up in the clinical language of a goal.
Compare that to a goal focused on teaching an individual how to use an augmentative communication device so they can explicitly tell a teacher, the lights in here are too bright, I need to leave. That is a skill that directly serves the individual's agency. It gives them power over their environment.
Yeah, and notice the difference in architecture there. Suppressing a hand flap is widening tolerance, asking the person to endure the discomfort quietly. Giving them a communication device to advocate for a lighting change is a step toward actually widening the room.
Yes. But because the industry of repair uses the exact same vocabulary, services, goals, skills for both of those fundamentally opposed practices, the control mechanism remains hidden in plain sight.
Looking at it through that lens, you could easily walk away feeling just incredibly cynical.
Oh, for sure.
If the language of care is a Trojan horse, you start to feel like every clinic, every special ed classroom, and every therapy session is inherently malicious. But Hoerricks makes a very deliberate pivot in the text here, I think, to prevent us from adopting this cartoon villain view of the world.
Right. Hoerricks is very careful about that.
The author writes, I want to be careful here. Not every therapist is an enforcer. Not every teacher is part of the machine. Not every support is a lie. I have known too many people doing real, humane, field-attuned work to pretend otherwise.
That caveat is vital. It forces the reader to hold two seemingly contradictory truths at the exact same time. There are thousands of deeply empathetic professionals out there. There are teachers who spend their own money to alter the lighting in their classrooms.
Yeah.
There are therapists who completely ignore the institutional playbook to truly listen to their neurodivergent clients. They are doing real humane work.
Okay, but I'm struggling to synthesize those two truths. If there is this massive workforce of genuinely good, empathetic people trying to help, and I know many people listening have encountered these wonderful professionals, how does the overarching system still function as a machine of control?
Well,
Like, I keep picturing a school full of left-handed children and brilliant, caring teachers. But the district purchasing department only ever buys right-handed scissors. The teachers want the kids to succeed, they're cheering them on, but the physical tools supplied by the institution actively enforce a right-handed norm.
the scissors analogy gets us part of the way there because it illustrates how standardized tools can cause unintended harm. But it's even deeper and more systemic than just having the wrong tools. It's about the financial and structural architecture of the industry itself. Think of it more like an enormous manufacturing plant designed exclusively to produce standard-sized puzzle pieces. When a uniquely shaped piece comes down the conveyor belt, the machine isn't just lacking the right tool. Its only operational setting, its entire reason for existing, is to sand off the edges of that unique piece until it fits into the standard box.
And the empathetic professional is just standing on the assembly line.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanism of how this happens in the real world, specifically through funding and insurance. If an empathetic, field-attuned therapist wants to work with an autistic child, that therapist needs to be paid, right?
Naturally.
In most healthcare systems, to get an insurance company to authorize and pay for services, the therapist is legally required to write a deficit-based report.
They have to prove the X-ray is broken.
Yes. They have to use the language of a pair. They must document how far the individual deviates from the established norm, and they must outline specific, measurable goals to fix those deficits. If a therapist writes to an insurance company and says, "My goal is to help this child flourish in their autistic identity and widen the room around them," the claim will likely just be denied.
Because the insurance architecture does not have a billing code for flourishing.
Exactly. It has billing codes for treating pathology.
Wow. So even if the therapist shuts the door to their office and practices beautiful, humane care, they are forced to document it, track it, and sell it to the funding sources using the vocabulary of norm enforcement.
The machine continues to churn.
The industry of repair maintains its momentum because the financial architecture literally demands that the individual be viewed as a broken thing requiring fixing.
The whole industry relies on the fact that an autistic person's natural neurology is incompatible with the standard-sized box of societal expectations.
It's like the cost of entry into society becomes a demand that you abandon who you actually are. This brings incredible weight to the phrase, priced out of personhood, which is the first half of the title of Hoerricks' piece.
It really does.
You have to pay for your seat at that crowded dinner table by leaving your true self at the door. You have to check your sensory needs, suppress your regulatory movements, and hide your natural communication style, simply to earn the privilege of being tolerated by the people around you.
And when an entire industry's primary output is making neurodivergent people easier for neurotypical people to manage, it ceases to be an industry of care. It is an industry of compliance.
Yeah.
The humane individuals working inside it are just constantly swimming against the current of an architecture built for repair.
There's this lingering, almost ominous note at the end of the text provided for our deep dive today. Hoerricks writes, "But I have also lived long enough inside these systems to know that entire industries can be," and the excerpt just intentionally cuts off right there. It's a massive cliffhanger.
Yeah. I have also lived long enough inside these systems to know that entire industries can be, it's a structural suspension. It forces the reader to synthesize everything that came before it. Entire industries can be blind to their own cruelty. Entire industries can be built on a foundation of control wrapped up in soft language.
Entire industries can be perfectly designed to price people out of their own personhood.
Exactly.
The journey through this text really reframes how we look at the scaffolding of our society. We've traced how the concept of support can function as a Trojan horse, smuggling norm enforcement into a person's life under the guise of care. We've unpacked the vast life-altering canyon between a system that merely tolerates an individual by forcing them to shrink, and a system that actually widens the room to allow for true human flourishing.
Right.
And we've examined the tragic reality that genuinely good people can find themselves locked inside an industry of repair, forced to use the language of deficits just to keep the lights on.
The framework Hoerricks provides is essentially it's a decoder ring. It strips away the linguistic camouflage that institutions use to protect themselves from scrutiny.
And so whether you are actively navigating the medical or educational systems for neurodivergent care right now, whether you're advocating for a family member, or whether you're simply observing the institutions in your own life, your workplace, your local school board, your community organizations, you now have a totally different way to interrogate the language they use.
To carry that forward and really building on the cliffhanger at the end of the text, there is a specific question that arises from this analysis. It's a lens to apply the next time you interact with an institutional structure.
What is that question?
The next time you're presented with a goal, the next time a doctor or a school administrator or an HR department hands you a metric to measure your readiness or your development, just pause and examine the architecture behind that metric. Ask yourself, is this goal genuinely designed to promote my flourishing? Or is it just the industry of repair trying to make me easier to tolerate?
Are they trying to widen the room for you, or are they just handing you a folding chair and expecting you to stay quiet? It is such a powerful lens to apply to the world around us. Keep looking closely at the language embedded in your own life. We'll catch you next time.